Case 1. Rhonda Bell Martin. Little Mrs. Arsenic, Montgomery, Alabama. She looked like someone's grandmother. Stocky, blue-eyed, auburn hair, black-rimmed glasses, always carrying a Bible. She waited tables at diners across Montgomery, chatted with regulars, paid her bills. She married 5 times and buried husband after husband, child after child, and every single time, she collected the sympathy of her community like a woman born to tragedy. But Rhonda Bell Martin was not a victim of fate. She was a serial killer, and her weapon of choice cost less than 50 cents at any corner drugstore in the state of Alabama. Rhonda Bell Tomley was born on November 4, 1906, in Lucedale, Mississippi. Her parents separated when she was 11. She dropped out of school after 7th grade, moved to Mobile, and at 15 years old, she eloped with her first husband, W.R. Willie Alderman, in January 1922. That marriage collapsed within 4 years. She would go on to marry 4 more times, and the people around her would pay for that with their lives. Her second husband was George W. Garrett, a railroad switchman. Together, they had 5 daughters. George died on Christmas Day, 1939. Rhonda would later admit she dissolved arsenic into his whiskey cocktails over the course of several days. He died vomiting, convulsing, and screaming in pain, while his wife stood nearby with a fresh drink. But George was not her first victim. Not even close. Let's go back to her children. 5 daughters with George Garrett. 5 children who depended on their mother for every meal, every glass of water, every bedtime story. 3 of them never made it out of childhood. Emmegene Garrett was approximately 3 years old in July of 1937. Rhonda would later tell investigators that on the day Emmegene died, the little girl asked her mother for a glass of water. And Rhonda, annoyed, in her own words, poured ant poison into a glass of milk and handed it to her daughter instead. Emmegene died that day. Rhonda told the neighbors the child had a heart attack. Nobody questioned it. A 3-year-old, dead of a supposed heart attack, buried and forgotten. Anna Carolyn Garrett was approximately 6 years old when she died in 1940. Same method. A single dose of ant poison dissolved into milk. Rhonda told people Carolyn died of a throat disorder. Again, no questions asked. Ellen Elizabeth Garrett was approximately 11 years old. For Ellen, Rhonda did not rush. She poisoned her daughter over the course of approximately 1 year, incrementally increasing the doses. Simultaneously, she was doing the same thing to her own mother, Mary Frances Gibbon, lacing their daily milk and coffee with ant poison. Both the child and the grandmother died within the same stretch of time. Rhonda mourned both funerals with quiet dignity. 2 more daughters, Mary Adelaide and Judith, also died young. Rhonda initially denied killing them, but one published account states she confessed to poisoning Mary Adelaide with milk after the child asked her for water, saying plainly, "I just got the urge, and suddenly I did it." Those words. About her own daughter. I just got the urge. By 1941, all 5 of Rhonda's daughters were dead. Now, she moved on. Her 3rd husband survived her. Her 4th husband, Claude Carroll Martin, a glass factory co-worker, was not so lucky. Rhonda began slipping arsenic into his coffee in early 1951. She poisoned him for approximately 3 months, systematically, patiently, and on April 27, 1951, Claude Martin died. Rhonda collected the insurance money. 8 months later, she married his son, Ronald Martin, 21 years her junior. She was his stepmother. Then she was his wife. Then she started poisoning him too. Ronald did not die, but the arsenic left him paralyzed from the waist down, a paraplegic for the rest of his life, permanently dependent on care, permanently broken. And while Ronald lay immobile in a hospital bed trying to figure out why his body was failing, Rhonda Bell Martin sat in a diner booth in Montgomery, sipping sweet tea and waiting tables. But the science was catching up with her. In late 1955, Ronald's doctors sent hair samples to a laboratory in Washington, D.C. The results came back positive for arsenic. The key detail, the one that broke the case open, was this. Arsenic deposits at the root of the hair and travels outward as the hair grows. You can read the history of poisoning like a timeline on a single strand of hair. Ronald Martin's hair told a story of months of sustained poisoning. Alabama's chief criminal investigator, Van Pruitt Jr., obtained court orders to exhume 6 bodies connected to Rhonda. Claude Martin, George Garrett, the daughters, Every single exhumed body showed elevated arsenic levels in organs, hair, and fingernails. The bodies told the truth that Rhonda had been burying for 20 years. She was arrested on March 18, 1956, in Mobile. Investigators questioned her for 3 days. On the third day, she broke. She signed a detailed, handwritten confession admitting to the murders of her mother, 2 husbands, and 3 daughters. She described exactly how she did it each time. Dissolved ant poison in milk for the children, in coffee or whiskey for the adults. She had been purchasing the poison openly at grocery and drug stores across Montgomery for 2 decades. When investigators asked her why she did it, she answered with one of the most chilling sentences ever recorded in an Alabama interrogation room. "Everybody always said I spoiled my husbands and children. That's the way I am. I always spoil anybody I love." The trial began June 4, 1956, in Montgomery. She was charged with first-degree murder for Claude Martin's death. Her defense team entered pleas of not guilty and not guilty by reason of insanity. A psychiatrist testified she was probably a schizophrenic. The prosecution brought in their own expert who testified she was completely sane. 12 jurors deliberated for 3 hours and 10 minutes. When the verdict was read, death, Rhonda buried her head in her arms and sobbed. She appealed. The Alabama Supreme Court affirmed the conviction and sentence. On October 11, 1957, at Kilby Prison in Montgomery, Rhonda Bell Martin walked into the execution chamber holding a Bible, wearing a new black and white dress she had made herself. She was quietly reciting the 23rd Psalm. She declined to make a final statement. The first shock from Yellow Mama, Alabama's electric chair, hit at 12:10 a.m. She was pronounced dead at 12:16 a.m. Prison officials found a note tucked inside her Bible. She had written it a year before her execution. It read, "And this is real, documented, on the public record. At my death, whether it be a natural death or otherwise, I want my body to be given to some scientific institution to be used as they see fit, but especially to see if someone can find out why I committed the crimes I have committed. I can't understand it, for I had no reason whatsoever. There is definitely something wrong. Can't someone find it and save someone else the agony I have been through?" She wanted science to find the answer she could not. Nobody did. Her family buried her in Montgomery Memorial Cemetery in an unmarked grave. She was the last woman executed in Alabama for 45 years. At minimum, she killed 6 people, 3 of them her own daughters, and the true number may be higher. Rhonda Bell Martin, a waitress, a Bible reader, a poisoner of children, and for 20 years, nobody noticed a thing. Case 2, Patricia Blackman. The beating death of Dominiqua Bryant, Dothan, Alabama. A 28-month-old girl had a bruise in the shape of a shoe sole on her chest. She had more than 30 injuries on her body. She had a fractured skull, a broken leg, blood on the floor, blood on the walls, and a broken pool cue that had been used on her small frame so hard it snapped. The woman who did this had adopted that child 9 months earlier. And for 5 of those months, a social worker visited every single month and called it a good relationship. Welcome to Case 2. Patricia Blackman was born November 3, 1969, in Dothan, Alabama, the seat of Houston County in the deep southeastern corner of the state. Her husband was in prison at the time of the events we are about to describe. She lived alone in a mobile home. In approximately August 1998, through the Houston County Juvenile Court, Blackman adopted Dominiqua Bryant, a toddler with no one else to turn to. For a period, on the surface, everything looked fine. Judy Watley, a caseworker with the Houston County Department of Human Resources, made monthly visits for 5 months following the adoption. She testified she observed what appeared to be a normal, even positive, mother-daughter dynamic. She saw no red flags significant enough to act on. She filed her reports and moved to the next case on her desk. But beneath the surface of that mobile home, Dominiqua was being beaten. And the beatings had been going on long enough that when medical examiners eventually examined her body, they found injuries in multiple stages of healing, meaning the abuse was not a single incident. It was systematic. It was ongoing. It was intentional. The night of May 29, 1999 began normally. At around 8 p.m., Wayne Johnson, the father-in-law of Patricia Blackman, saw Dominiqua at his home. She was playing. She was acting normal. She was fine. Blackman collected the child and left. From that moment forward, Dominiqua was alone with Patricia Blackman. Somewhere in the next 90 minutes, something catastrophic happened inside that mobile home. At 9:30 p.m., Dothan paramedic Eddie Smith received a 911 call. Blackman was on the line saying her child was not breathing. Smith arrived to find 28-month-old Dominiqua on the floor of the master bedroom. She was wearing only a diaper and blood-soaked socks. She was covered in vomit. There was a large hematoma on her forehead. Blood was on her chest. She was not breathing. Paramedics worked on her in the field, got her to Flowers Hospital, where Dr. Matthew Christa established an airway, but Dominiqua never regained consciousness. At 10:22 p.m., she was pronounced dead. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Alfredo Paredes. What he documented was not a fall, not an accident, not a medical emergency. What he documented was a massacre of a child. More than 30 individual injuries. A fractured skull, a fractured leg, bruising across her chest, abdomen, groin, both ears, both cheeks, and her buttocks. Multiple internal injuries. The child had been beaten across her entire body. She had vomited during the attack, indicating she was conscious and suffering while it happened. Dr. Paredes testified during the penalty phase that all of the injuries would have been painful, that they were more than necessary to cause death, and that Dominiqua was conscious during the initial beating and lost consciousness during its continuation. Then came the shoe print. On Dominiqua's chest, imprinted in bruise, was the sole of a shoe. Alabama's chief medical examiner, Dr. James Downs, was called in. He examined the imprint. He examined the sandals Patricia Blackman had been wearing on the night of the murder. He concluded, on the record, under oath, that the imprint was consistent with the sandals on Blackman's feet. Patricia Blackman had stomped her 2-year-old daughter in the chest, hard enough to leave a permanent bruise in the shape of her shoe. In the trailer, investigators found a broken pool cue. It tested positive for Dominiqua's blood. Blackman was indicted for capital murder in August 1999. The defense strategy at trial was to attack the weight of the evidence and present character witnesses who testified to Blackman's apparently positive relationship with Dominiqua. Neighbor Tammy Wigfall testified she had used Blackman as a babysitter for her own children, repeatedly, trusting her completely. Patricia Blackman did not take the stand. The jury heard the shoe print evidence. The jury heard about the pool cue. The jury heard Dr. Paredes describe 30-plus injuries on a 28-month-old. The jury heard that Dominiqua was conscious while being beaten. The jury deliberated and returned a verdict of guilty of capital murder. They recommended death by a vote of 10-2. On June 7, 2002, Patricia Blackman was formally sentenced to death. Prosecutor Robert Valeska said simply, "The evidence was overwhelming." Blackman appealed. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed the conviction on August 5, 2005. The Alabama Supreme Court denied review in 2008. Every court that has reviewed this case has arrived at the same conclusion. There is no question about what she did to that child. As of March 2026, Patricia Blackman sits on death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama. She has been there since August 2002, longer than any other woman currently on Alabama's death row. She has now outlasted the child she murdered by 27 years. No execution date has been scheduled. Dominiqua Bryant, 28 months old, never got to see 3. Case 3. Tierra Capri Gobble. A 4-month-old's broken bones. Dothan, Alabama. She was not supposed to be near her children. A court order said so explicitly. The state of Florida had already removed her daughter from her care. They had removed her infant son from her at the hospital, within 24 hours of his birth. There were active proceedings to terminate her parental rights entirely. And yet, she was living in the same trailer as her 4-month-old son, feeding him, holding him, left alone with him for 10 straight hours before he stopped breathing. This is the story of Phoenix Jordan Cody Parrish and the mother the legal system failed to keep away from him. Tierra Capri Gobble was born April 18, 1983. Before she killed Cody, she had already been investigated for the abuse and neglect of her older daughter, Jewel. In December 2003, when Jewel was 18 months old, the Florida Department of Children and Families removed the child from Gobble's custody and placed her with Edgar Parrish, identified as a paternal uncle. 8 months later, in August 2004, Gobble gave birth to Phoenix Jordan Parrish at a hospital in Plant City, Florida. The state acted within 24 hours, recognizing the same mother who had already lost custody of one child. Phoenix was removed from Gobble immediately after birth. He was also placed with Edgar Parrish. At this point, Gobble was under a court order explicitly prohibiting her from any contact with either of her children. Now here is where the system collapsed completely. Edgar Parrish, the man entrusted with the safety of both children, moved from Florida to Dothan, Alabama, in violation of his guardianship conditions. He moved into a trailer. And in October 2004, when Phoenix was just 2 months old, Tierra Capri Gobble and her boyfriend, Samuel David Hunter, moved into that same trailer. Parrish allowed it. And so Phoenix, who had been ripped from his mother at birth to protect him, was now sleeping under the same roof as the woman the state had already deemed unfit to parent. On December 2, 2004, 13 days before Phoenix died, formal proceedings were initiated in Florida to permanently terminate Gobble's parental rights. The paperwork was filed. The legal wheels were turning. 13 days too late. The night of December 15, 2004. Gobble later described it to investigators. Phoenix was being difficult, fussin', in her words. Around 1 a.m., she fed him a bottle, put him down. At 9 a.m., she checked on him. He was playing. She went back to sleep. At around 11 a.m., she checked again. He was not breathing. She did not call 911. She later told investigators she did not want to get into trouble. So instead she called another trailer resident, Walter Jordan, who went to get Edgar Parrish, who then called emergency services. By the time paramedics arrived at Southeast Alabama Medical Center, Phoenix was already gone. He was pronounced dead in the emergency room. Emergency room physician Dr. Jonas R. Sound described the child who arrived on his table. He had bruises, contusions, on his face, scalp, and chest. They were everywhere. X-rays taken immediately showed a fractured skull, fractures to both wrists, and a fracture to the right upper arm. The brain had a subdural hematoma, a blood clot between the skull and brain. That was the primary cause of death. The Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences performed the full autopsy. What they found was devastating. 5 broken ribs. A tear inside the mouth consistent with a bottle being shoved into it forcibly. Multiple bruises across the face, head, neck, and chest. The cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head. The injuries did not happen in a single moment. They represented multiple separate acts of violence. And critically, since Gobble herself confirmed Phoenix was alive and playing at 9 a.m., medical examiners concluded that he suffered for an extended period before dying. Fully aware of his pain, unable to understand it, unable to escape it. Dr. Sound testified plainly. Phoenix would have been in tremendous pain from any of the numerous injuries. Now, what did Gobble's own statements reveal? A babysitter named Tori Jordan, who had known Gobble for approximately 2 years, testified under oath that Gobble had told her, if she couldn't have her children, no one could. Read that again. If I can't have them, no one can. Gobble also wrote a letter that was introduced as evidence at trial. In her own handwriting. It's my fault that my son died, but I didn't mean for it to happen. At trial in Houston County, the defense tried to introduce an expert witness on brittle bone disease as an alternative explanation for Phoenix's fractures. That expert witness withdrew from the case days before trial. Gobble took the stand in her own defense. Under oath, she admitted she was under a court order prohibiting her from being near her children. She admitted she was the only adult who had contact with Phoenix during the 10 hours before he was found. She admitted she saw bruises on Phoenix in the days before his death. And she admitted she did nothing about those bruises because she was, in her own words, scared. The jury convicted her of capital murder. They recommended death by a vote of 10-2. On December 1, 2005, Tierra Capri Gobble was sentenced to death. The sentencing court stated directly, the mother defendant, Tierra Gobble, was not supposed to be around the child due to her abuse and neglect. Apparently, the pattern of abuse and neglect continued until she ended the life of this small child. Her co-defendant Samuel David Hunter, her boyfriend, who was also present in the trailer, pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was released in February 2009. Edgar Parrish, the man who violated guardianship conditions and allowed all of this to happen, pleaded guilty to child abuse and was released in November 2008. Both men walked free within 5 years. Gobble did not. The Alabama Supreme Court denied her final appeal on September 14, 2012. As of March 2026, Tierra Capri Gobble remains on death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison for women. She is one of 5 women there, all convicted of killing children. Phoenix Jordan Cody Parrish was 4 months old. Case 4. Natasha Yvonne Ward. 3 children starved to death in the dark. Huntsville, Alabama. The apartment manager said she was quiet, paid rent on time, used to walk the kids to school every day. Former neighbors remembered her as a religious woman who kept to herself. The children's teachers described 3 normal, active kids who liked their classmates and came to school regularly, until they didn't come back. And when law enforcement finally broke down the door of that apartment in the Whispering Hills complex on Patton Road in Huntsville, they found 3 children on the floor, 1 in each bedroom, fully clothed, emaciated, dead for at least a week, in a dark apartment with no electricity and no running water, in the middle of a January winter. Their mother had been living with them, all 3 of them, for a week after they died. This is the story of Natasha Yvonne Ward. Natasha was approximately 33 years old at the time of these events. She was a single mother of 3, receiving more than $500 a month in government assistance, plus approximately $400 in food stamps. She lived in the Whispering Hills apartment complex in southwest Huntsville, Madison County. By all outward appearances, she was a functioning member of her community, bills paid, kids in school, unremarkable in every way. Her children were bullet operator Shanika Y. Ward, age 11. Bullet operator Latricia L. Ward, age 9. Bullet operator Christopher O. Ward, age 8. 3 kids ranging from 8 to 11 years old, all attending Huntsville City Schools, known by their classmates, loved by their teachers. They stopped coming to school at the start of the winter holiday break in late December 2004. The break ended. Other children returned to class in January 2005. Shanika, Latricia, and Christopher Ward did not. Around January 12th, Ward's utilities account was closed. No electricity, no running water. In the middle of an Alabama January, in an apartment with 3 children under 12. Family members tried to visit throughout January. Ward would not open the door. A representative of the Huntsville City School System attempted a welfare check and was also refused entry. On January 24th, the same day investigators would later believe the children were dying or already dead, social workers knocked on the apartment door. The blinds were drawn. No response. They noted no obvious signs of occupancy and walked away. They did not call police. They did not obtain a welfare check order. They did nothing. On February 2, 2005, approximately a week after the children were dead, Natasha Ward mailed a postcard requesting information on 6 apartment complexes. She asked specifically about a 2-bedroom apartment for 1 person. She was already planning to move. Alone. Without 3 children. February 4, 2005. At 2:56 p.m., the children's grandmother called police. Officers entered the apartment. What they found inside would define the worst moments of every law enforcement career present that day. The bodies of all 3 children, Shanika, Latricia, and Christopher, were on the floors of 3 separate bedrooms. Fully clothed. Dead. Based on autopsies, they had been dead for approximately 1 week to 10 days. They appeared, in the words of investigators, severely malnourished. The apartment had been without electricity or water for weeks. It was dark and cold, and Natasha Ward had been living inside it, with all 3 bodies, for at least a week before her own mother made that call. Investigators from the Huntsville Police Department, led by Sergeant Ed Kane, found Ward and brought her in for questioning. She confessed. She said she had deliberately starved her children to death. No elaborate story. No alternate explanation. She said she starved them. A prosecutor would later state, Ward prayed for her children as they starved to death in her dark apartment and stayed with them for at least a week after they died. Then came the investigation into her finances. A WAF investigative report revealed something that stops you cold. While her 3 children were starving, while Shanika, Latricia, and Christopher were wasting away in a dark apartment without food, without water, without light, Natasha Ward was sending hundreds of dollars to television evangelist Joyce Meyer. She had also sponsored a child monetarily through the Trinity Broadcasting Network. She completed all 8 Bible study courses offered by a local church. She received religious literature. She considered herself a woman of God. Minister Ron Williams confirmed her last correspondence with his ministry was sometime in January 2005, the same month her children died. Pastor T.C. Johnson, when told of the case, responded, "You can't buy God. God expects you to take care of yourself." Ward was charged with capital murder on February 4, 2005. She entered a plea of not guilty by reason of mental disease or defect in 2006. Courts prepared for a competency hearing, but on February 7, 2007, Ward accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to 3 counts of reckless murder. Circuit Judge Lloyd H. Little Jr. sentenced her to 3 consecutive life sentences. With parole eligibility in approximately 42 years, she would be in her 70s before she could even apply for release. Ward was given the opportunity to make a statement at sentencing. She had nothing to say. Her family was not in the courtroom. They were down the hall in an attorney's office, reportedly in prayer that her life would be spared. Outside that courtroom, grief counselors had already been deployed to the schools that Shanika, Latricia, and Christopher would never return to. Classmates who had known them, played with them, sat beside them, suddenly learned that those 3 children were gone, that they had been gone for weeks, and that no one had known. Natasha Yvonne Ward is currently serving 3 consecutive life sentences in Alabama. Her 3 children were 11, 9, and 8 years old. They starved to death in the cold and the dark, in an apartment their own mother chose not to leave, while she sent money to a televangelist and waited for them to be gone. Case 5, Christy Michelle Scott. Arson murder for insurance money, Russellville, Alabama. A 6-year-old boy with autism was asleep in his bedroom at 2:30 in the morning. Somebody had sedated him, pumped his blood full of codeine and promethazine and amphetamines, so he would not wake up. Somebody had also yanked the smoke detector off the hallway wall before the fire started, leaving it on the floor, undamaged by the flames. And when the house began to burn, somebody carried the 4-year-old brother to safety, ran to the neighbor's house, and did not immediately tell anyone that the 6-year-old was still inside. 12 hours before the fire, a $100,000 life insurance policy had been taken out on that 6-year-old boy. The total potential insurance payout on both children combined, $175,000. This is what the evidence showed. This is what a jury believed. And this is why Christy Michelle Scott is on death row. Christy Michelle Bray was born August 10, 1978, in Haleyville, Alabama. Her father, Don Bray, was a successful woodman of the World Insurance Agent, a detail that will become critical. She grew up in Franklin County, married Jeremy S. Scott, an IT specialist, and they settled at 180 Senior Drive in Russellville. They had 2 sons, Mason Scott, age 6, diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder and ADHD, and Noah Riley Scott, age 4. Christy herself worked as an Alpha insurance agent. She knew how insurance policies worked. She knew how to apply for them. She knew how to collect on them. In the months before the fire, she obtained 2 Alpha insurance policies covering both boys. A $50,000 policy on May 6, 2008. A $25,000 policy on June 14. Then, on the afternoon of August 15, 2008, approximately 12 hours before the fire, she obtained a $100,000 Woodman of the World policy specifically on Mason's life. Through her father's connections with his company's policies, $175,000 in total coverage on her 2 children, with the largest policy secured just hours before Mason died. August 16, 2008, at approximately 2:30 a.m. Jeremy Scott was out of town on a business trip. Christy and 4-year-old Noah were in the master bedroom at one end of the house. 6-year-old Mason was in the boys' bedroom at the other end. Christy arrived at neighbor Jennifer Davidson's front door carrying Noah, screaming that her house was on fire. Davidson called 911 at 2:33 a.m. For nearly 5 full minutes, Christy did not mention that Mason was still inside the burning house. It was almost 5 minutes before firefighters were told a child was trapped. Davidson's boyfriend, Brian Copeland, ran to the Scott house. He testified that Christy told him all the doors were locked and there was no way in. He testified, critically, that he did not have to physically restrain Christy from running back inside. She claimed later that she tried repeatedly to re-enter. Copeland's testimony directly contradicted that. Fire trucks arrived within 10 minutes. But the blaze was burning so hot that responders could not enter the structure until 4 a.m. When they finally reached Mason's bedroom, he was already dead. Franklin County Coroner Elsie Malone pronounced him at the scene. In the ambulance, Christie turned to Davidson and said, "Don't call Jeremy." Now, the evidence built by investigators was methodical and devastating. Toxicologist Dr. Jack R. Kalin of the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences analyzed Mason's blood. He found codeine, promethazine, a powerful sedative, and amphetamines at a level of 450 nanograms per milliliter. Normal therapeutic levels for a child Mason's size being treated for ADHD, less than 100. Mason had been given a drug cocktail before the fire. The combination of codeine and promethazine, consistent with a prescription cough syrup, was specifically designed to make him sleep deeply and not wake up. Someone had sedated a 6-year-old autistic boy before setting his house on fire. Deputy Fire Marshal Dolan Gassett examined the interior of the house. In the hallway outside the boy's bedroom, he found the smoke detector. It was lying on the floor. It had been pulled from the wall before the fire started, undamaged by heat or flame. Firearms and tool mark expert Morris Brown testified the detector showed evidence of being forcibly removed from the wall prior to the blaze. Someone had disabled the one device that might have woken Mason in time. Pathologist Dr. Emily Ward determined Mason died of smoke inhalation and thermal burns. The carbon monoxide level in his blood exceeded 90%, which tells us definitively that Mason was alive and breathing when the fire filled his room with smoke. He did not die instantly. He was sedated but breathing. He was conscious enough to apparently try to hide. His body was found near his bed. He breathed smoke until there was nothing left to breathe. And Russellville Fire Marshal Bobby Malone discovered something that pushed this case into a completely different category. Christy Bray Scott had been connected to 5 separate fires in the past 8 years. 2 at her previous home on Steel Frame Road, which she attributed to an air freshener plug-in. Fires at her father's home. Fires at her grandmother's home. 5 fires. 1 woman. Over 8 years. Malone immediately called the state fire marshal. Then came the behavioral evidence. And in some ways, this is the most disturbing part. Hairstylist Anna K. Greenhill testified that on the day Mason died, the day of his death, Christy and Jeremy came in for a scheduled hair appointment. They joked. They bantered. They chatted about nothing in particular. In the entire appointment, Christy never once mentioned Mason's name. Not once. On the day her son died in a fire. At the funeral, Christy was overheard telling a relative, "Noah's always wanted a baby sister. Maybe he can get one now." She was standing at her son's graveside. She was discussing trying for another child. The trial opened June 12, 2009, in Franklin County, before Judge Terry Dempsey. District Attorney Joey Rushing prosecuted. More than 70 witnesses took the stand for the state. Christy Scott testified in her own defense, maintaining the fire was accidental and electrical in origin. The jury rejected that entirely. On July 8, they convicted her of 3 counts of capital murder, murder of a child under 14, murder during first-degree arson, and murder for pecuniary gain. During the penalty phase, the jury recommended life imprisonment without parole, 7 to 5. Mason's father and extended family had pleaded against the death penalty. The prosecutor acknowledged he had no victim witnesses favoring death. On August 5, 2009, Judge Dempsey overrode the jury. He sentenced Christy Michelle Scott to death. He said, "Justice must be served, and the only way justice can be served in this case is by death." He described what Mason experienced. Even if the victim succumbed to smoke inhalation before being burned, it would still have been a horrible death. Struggling to breathe and trying to escape would be terrifying for the young child. The Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals affirmed in October 2012. The Alabama Supreme Court upheld it in September 2014. The United States Supreme Court denied certiorari on April 20, 2015. Alabama abolished judicial override, the process Dempsey used to impose death against the jury's recommendation, in April 2017. That law was not retroactive. Christy Michelle Scott was sentenced under a process the state of Alabama has since decided is wrong. She remains on death row anyway. She is currently at Julia Tutwiler Prison. No execution date has been set. Mason Scott was 6 years old. He had autism. He trusted his mother. She sedated him, disabled his smoke detector, and burned his house down to collect insurance money. Case 6. Heather Level Keaton. The DeBlaise children, Mobile, Alabama. They called Natalie and Chase demon spawns from hell. They duct-taped their hands behind their backs and their mouths shut as punishment. They fed them a few little pieces of lettuce for dinner. They shared a single small box of cereal between 2 growing children. They poisoned them with antifreeze, after first testing the antifreeze on a family dog to see how long it would take to kill something. And when 4-year-old Natalie was dying, still calling out, "Daddy, Daddy," from inside a closet where she'd been stuffed in a suitcase, nobody came. Their father stood accused beside her. But make no mistake, this case is about Heather Level Keaton, the woman who ran the household, orchestrated the abuse, and became the first woman ever sentenced to death in the history of Mobile County. Natalie Alexis DeBlaise was born November 4, 2005. Jonathan Chase DeBlaise was born December 29, 2006. Their biological mother, Corinne Heathcock, relinquished custody after a troubled marriage, telling investigators she could not provide for them and that their father, John DeBlaise, seemed capable. Her last contact with her children was November 17, 2009. After that, she never heard from them again. Heather Level Keaton was born in 1988 in Louisville, Kentucky. She was severely visually impaired, suffering from aniridia, posterior cataracts, glaucoma, and nystagmus. Despite her vision impairment, she was functioning, holding a scholarship at Spring Hill College in Mobile, performing daily activities independently. A defense psychologist testified she showed signs of depression and bipolar disorder beginning at age 14, possible borderline personality disorder, and PTSD from childhood sexual abuse. She had, according to that same psychologist, very deficient social skills. DeBlaise and Keaton met online in October 2008. By March 2009, Keaton had moved into the family home with DeBlaise, his parents, and the 2 children. The abuse began almost immediately. DeBlaise's mother, and DeBlaise, witnessed Keaton putting the children in timeout by duct-taping their hands behind their backs and duct-taping their mouths shut. Alarmed, Richard Andon DeBlaise told Keaton to leave in July 2009. She left. In December, she came back. Richard Andon moved out rather than continue to watch what was happening to those children. The abuse escalated rapidly once the grandparents were gone. Multiple witnesses testified later. Keaton called the children demon spawns from hell and spawn of Satan routinely. She said Natalie was a discipline problem who thought she was a princess. She told others she was worried the children would be jealous of her unborn child. She struck Natalie in the head with a hairbrush. She forced them to stand in corners for hours. She taped brooms to their backs. She restricted food so severely that at the Peach Place Inn, where the family lived from late January through the summer of 2010, the children always looked pale and sickly. A friend who saw 3-year-old Chase at a Walmart in March 2010 said he looked emergency room sick. In a stupor, very pale, barely responsive. Fellow inmates who later spoke with Keaton in custody testified she admitted to them that she and DeBlaise first tested antifreeze on a family dog to find out how long it would take to kill a living thing. Then they gave it to the children. March 4, 2010, the day Natalie died. Before leaving for classes at Spring Hill, DeBlaise told Keaton that if Natalie was giving her problems, she should put some tarp down in the closet and just put her in there, and block the closet with a suitcase. Natalie, who had been showing symptoms consistent with antifreeze poisoning for days, her breath smelled toxic, described as smelling like death. She was losing control of her bodily functions, vomiting black stuff, was placed in the closet, bound with duct tape, gagged, stuffed inside a suitcase. Keaton heard the child crying from inside the closet, "Daddy, Daddy." She told her to wait for her father to come home. When DeBlaise returned, Natalie was dead. DeBlaise placed his daughter's body in his van. He drove with Keaton and Chase to a heavily wooded area near Maternal, Alabama, and buried the child in the dirt. Natalie was 4 years old. June 20, 2010. Chase had been crying continuously since his sister's disappearance. He asked for Natalie constantly, in front of others. Keaton told a fellow inmate later that they had to get rid of Chase or else they were going to be in trouble because he cried all the time continuously for his sister. On the night of June 20, Keaton duct-taped Chase's hands to the sides of his legs, taped a broom handle to his back, placed a sock in his mouth and taped it shut, forced him to stand in a corner throughout the night while both adults slept in their bed. Chase was also being poisoned with antifreeze. He died during or after this ordeal. He was 3 years old. His body was placed in plastic garbage bags. DeBlaise drove toward Van Cleve, Mississippi. On the way, he and Keaton stopped at a video game store to buy 2 games, because, with no children left, they now had the free time. Chase's remains were buried in the woods near Van Cleve. The family moved to Louisville, Kentucky. For 5 months, nobody knew. Then, in November 2010, Keaton's own mother, Helena Keaton, overheard an argument between the couple and realized something terrible had happened to the children. Keaton admitted to her mother that Natalie was dead. Helena Keaton called Louisville police on November 18, 2010. Law enforcement moved quickly. DeBlaise was apprehended in Florida. On December 3, he led investigators to the burial locations. On December 8, Chase's partial skeletal remains were recovered near Van Cleve. On December 11, Natalie's remains were found near Maternal. By the time they were exhumed, all that remained of Natalie was 68 bones and 3 teeth. All that remained of Chase was 21 bones and 2 teeth. The state medical examiner, Dr. Stacy Turner, testified the likely cause of death for both children was a combination of poisoning, dehydration, starvation, and asphyxia. John DeBlaise was convicted of capital murder in November 2014 and sentenced to death on January 8, 2015. He told the court, "I am not going to beg for mercy." Heather Level Keaton's trial began May 8, 2015. She was convicted May 27. Capital murder for Chase's death, reckless manslaughter for Natalie's. 11 jurors recommended death, 1 dissented. On August 20, 2015, Judge Roderick Stout sentenced her to death, plus 20 years. She became the first woman sentenced to death in Mobile County history. District Attorney Ashley Rich called her domineering, manipulative, deceitful, and morally unhinged. Her death sentence was briefly overturned in October 2020 on a procedural issue, reinstated in January 2021, and upheld again by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals in December 2021. The United States Supreme Court dismissed her final appeal on June 5, 2023. Heather Level Keaton is currently on death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison. Natalie was 4 years old. Chase was 3. They are buried in Alabama and Mississippi, in unmarked ground, in woods neither child ever walked through while they were alive. Case 7. Shirley Matthews. A skeleton wrapped in skin, Elmore County, Alabama. He was born in July 2018, weighing 6 pounds and 2 ounces. Perfectly healthy. A normal infant, the youngest of at least 5 children in the Matthews household, placed in his mother's arms and sent home from the hospital. 2 months later, he was brought into an emergency room weighing 4 pounds and 13 ounces. He had not been sick. There was no underlying medical condition. He had simply been allowed to starve, slowly, visibly, measurably, for 60 days. He had lost more than a pound of his birth weight. In 2 months, he had gained nothing. When the autopsy photographs were taken, Coffee County District Attorney C.J. Robinson described them as images worse than you would expect to see in a horror movie. A description made by a man who has seen a great deal. This is the story of Carson Matthews and the mother who starved him to death. Shirley Matthews and her husband Christopher Matthews lived in Elmore County, Alabama. They had at least 5 children. In July 2018, Shirley gave birth to Carson, their youngest. Hospital staff documented his birth weight, 6 pounds, 2 ounces. He went home in his mother's arms. What happened in that home over the next 2 months represents one of the most preventable deaths in this entire documentary. Carson was never taken to a doctor after his birth discharge. Not once. No well baby checkups. No weight monitoring. No vaccinations. No professional eye on his development. Just a household where nobody was paying enough attention or where someone was deliberately withholding care. By the time Carson was approximately 2 months old, he was brought unresponsive to Elmore Community Hospital. He weighed 4 pounds and 13 ounces. Medical professionals worked on him but could not save him. He died. The autopsy documented the cause of death as negligence. The manner of death was homicide. No medical condition. No disease. No organic explanation. The child was healthy and was simply not fed enough to survive. DA Robinson described the autopsy photographs in court with language he clearly could not soften. The photos in this case were worse than you would expect to see in a horror movie. This withered child's body was nothing but a dirty, skin-covered skeleton. A haunting image that no one who saw it will ever forget. He went on. This child crying out in agony for help until he didn't have the strength to do anything, but slowly gasped for breath until his body just shut down. When investigators questioned the parents, both made statements that defied comprehension. Shirley Matthews told investigators she never once took Carson to a doctor after his birth. She claimed she had been feeding him regularly and simply thought he would eventually gain weight. She watched a newborn lose more than a full pound over 2 months and interpreted that as something that would correct itself. She said nothing. She did nothing. Her husband, Christopher Matthews, 40 years old at the time of his sentencing, admitted he had never personally fed his child. His justification, offered without apparent awareness of how it sounded. He believed he had no duty to do so since he was the father, implying childcare and feeding were the mother's responsibilities alone. DA Robinson addressed both admissions directly. The infant starved to death, plain and simple. No rhyme, no reason, never taken to a doctor, no underlying medical condition. And evil is real. Society can attempt to sugarcoat evil in a variety of ways. But there is no excuse or justification I am willing to accept for starving an infant to death and refusing to seek medical treatment as they wither away. The case took 6 years from Carson's death to Shirley's conviction, likely complicated by pretrial motions, expert medical testimony preparation, and pandemic-related court closures. In July 2024, an Elmore County jury convicted Shirley Matthews of aggravated child abuse. Circuit Judge Amanda Baxley sentenced her to 20 years in prison, the maximum the law at the time of the offense allowed. Christopher Matthews was convicted of the same charge in August 2025 and received the same sentence. At Christopher's sentencing, Judge Baxley was explicit about her frustration. "I wish I could sentence you to more than 20 years, but the law at the time of this offense handcuffed the prosecution and handcuffs me as well." DA Robinson had already anticipated this problem. He had authored Winston's Law in 2016, a piece of legislation aimed at strengthening child abuse penalties in Alabama. The law was later updated, following the 2022 Autauga County Journey Daycare case, specifically to address deaths resulting from withholding care. Robinson noted, "If this crime happened today, we could seek up to 99 years in prison. Unfortunately, in this case, 20 years is the maximum sentence available." Both Shirley and Christopher Matthews are currently serving their 20-year sentences. Carson Matthews was 2 months old. He never had a chance to grow, to crawl, to speak a single word, to eat a full meal, to feel full. He was born healthy and was starved to a skeleton in a house where 2 adults watched and did nothing. Case 8. Christy Marie Seipel, a mother who sold her daughter, Phoenix City, Alabama. The little girl stopped at a gas station one summer afternoon, saw a barefoot child, and gave that child her own favorite shoes right off her feet. She was 5 years old and already knew how to be generous, how to be kind, how to see someone in need and respond. She loved to sing. She loved to dance. She loved to record videos. She was described by everyone who knew her as a social butterfly with a smile that could fill a room. Her name was Camari Lonell Holland, and her mother sold her for $1,300. Camari was born November 23, 2016, in Columbus, Georgia. Her father, Corey Maurice Holland of Phoenix City, Alabama, had primary custody. He had fought for that custody because of Camari's mother, Christy Marie Seipel, also known as Christy Hoskins, a 35-year-old woman whose relationship with her children had been defined by drug abuse, neglect, and court intervention. In 2018, Seipel had been charged with chemical endangerment of a child for exposing her own fetus to marijuana while pregnant. The Department of Human Resources had previously removed Camari and her brother from Seipel's custody following reports of drug abuse. A court order was in place. She was to have no contact with her children. None. Jeremy Tremaine Williams, 37 years old, had a history that should have put him in prison for life long before December 2021. In 2005, he was suspected in the death of his 1-month-old daughter, Nadia Trennis Williams, in North Pole, Alaska, a case that was later reopened and resulted in a murder indictment. In 2009, he was charged with burning a 3-year-old with hot water. His ex-wife testified at his sentencing that he killed their infant daughter and sexually abused her 4-year-old. Multiple women came forward to say he had sexually abused them as children. He had been in and out of contact with law enforcement across multiple states. He was walking free in December 2021. Williams had a relationship with Seipel. He told her he wanted to have sex with Kamari. Seipel agreed to arrange it. She initially asked for $2,500. Williams negotiated her down. The final agreed price was $1,300, which, records indicate, was never actually paid. Christy Marie Seipel agreed to sell access to her 5-year-old daughter's body for $1,300 that she never even received. On December 12, 2021, Corey Holland allowed Kamari and her brother to visit Seipel in Columbus, in violation of the existing court order. That evening, Williams took Kamari to his former vacant house on 15th Avenue in Phoenix City, Alabama. What happened inside that house over the next 2 hours is in the court record. It is confirmed by forensic evidence and by the videos Williams filmed. He raped the child. He engaged in sodomy and forced oral sex. He forced Kamari to ingest methamphetamine. He filmed everything. Then he wrapped a ligature around her neck and strangled her. Face to face, for 10 to 15 minutes, until she stopped moving. The autopsy, performed by Dr. David Rydzuski of the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, confirmed the cause of death as asphyxia due to ligature strangulation, with genital trauma and methamphetamine in her blood. She was 5 years old. Williams committed further acts on her body after death and filmed those as well. Seipel called police at 5:50 a.m. on December 13, reporting Kamari missing. She said she woke up and found her daughter gone, the front door open, the child having apparently walked out in the middle of the night. She made this call knowing exactly where Kamari was, knowing exactly what Williams had done, having agreed to it in advance. Before her arrest, Seipel appeared on local television in a tearful interview. "I'm coping. I'm making it. I am a mommy, and I didn't have nothing to do with this. She was my life." 2 days after Kamari's body was found, Seipel appeared on camera again, this time donating Kamari's Christmas presents to a charity toy drive. She was arrested on December 28 by the U.S. Marshal Service at a Circle K on Victory Drive. Jeremy Tremaine Williams pleaded guilty on March 13, 2024. In April, his sentencing trial was held. The jury deliberated 90 minutes. Judge David Johnson sentenced Williams to death on 4 counts of capital murder, plus life for human trafficking. In May 2025, Williams requested to waive all his appeals and asked for an expedited execution date. Christy Marie Seipel's murder charges were dropped in exchange for a guilty plea to first-degree human trafficking, one of the first convictions under Alabama's new child sex trafficking statute. On July 18, 2024, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison, a $10,000 fine, and lifetime sex offender registration. The reaction was immediate and fierce. Corey Holland told reporters, "She's a monster. A real mother protects and would die for her children. Christy is a monster." Jury foreperson Stacey Moat, speaking after Williams' verdict, said, "No child should have to endure what happened to her." Kamari Lonell Holland, 5 years old. The little girl who gave a stranger her shoes at a gas station. She was sold by her own mother and murdered in a vacant house in Phoenix City, Alabama, in December 2021. Case 9, Nancy Margaret Johnson. Murder-suicide during a custody war, Sims, Alabama. 14 days. That is how much time separated a written warning from a child welfare agency, on record, in a court file, explicitly saying these children were not safe with their mother. And the moment that same mother dismissed the divorce case, reconciled with her husband, and kept her children in her orbit for 16 more months. 14 days between the warning and the window closing. By the time the system tried again to protect Mia and Jacob Johnson, it was too late. Nancy Margaret Johnson, née Nancy Lyon, was 37 years old. Originally from Guatemala, she immigrated to the United States after 2001, eventually settling in the Mobile area where she had family. She met her husband Derek Johnson at church in 2015 and married him in 2016 in Washington State. Derek was a maintenance mechanic at Boeing. They had 2 children, Mia Johnson, age 5, and Jacob Johnson, age 2, born in the early years of their marriage. Derek eventually left Boeing, researched affordable places to live, and found Semmes, a community in West Mobile County, where they could purchase a house outright with cash and live without a mortgage. They moved to Evergreen Court approximately 2 years before the events of September 2023. Derek would later describe what happened to Nancy's mental state during the COVID-19 pandemic. His account, given to Fox News, is specific and detailed. It started all with QAnon. I would get phone calls at work from her saying there was going to be blackouts, that we needed to have a meeting point. She went from one thing to another. It just kept jumping and jumping to all sorts of things online. He wrote on a GoFundMe page that Nancy was having an identity crisis since the pandemic started and had refused to get any sort of help or allow anyone to intervene. Mobile County Sheriff Paul Birch later confirmed there was clearly some psychiatric issues with the mother. Nancy's brother Freddie Lyon disputed this completely, insisting, "I totally can assure you that her mental state was perfectly fine. The truth may lie somewhere between family loyalty and documented reality." In April 2023, Nancy filed for divorce. A 9-page settlement was drafted. But in June, a DHR caseworker contacted Derek directly, not through the court, not through an attorney, but reaching out personally, to express her concerns about Nancy's mental health and the safety of the children. The official court document stated that DHR workers do not feel it is safe for the minor children to remain in the care and custody of the plaintiff. Derek filed for emergency custody immediately. 14 days later, Nancy and Derek jointly filed to dismiss the divorce, claiming reconciliation. Judge Walter Honeycutt approved the dismissal. The DHR concern disappeared from the active docket. The children stayed with Nancy. The reconciliation did not hold. Over the following months, Semmes police responded to between 6 and 8 domestic disturbance calls at the Evergreen Court home. In August 2023, Nancy flew to Utah and obtained a protection from abuse order against Derek in that state. Derek filed for divorce again on August 9th. On September 20th, Nancy returned to Alabama for a custody hearing. On September 26th, Judge Honeycutt issued an order, shared weekly custody, each parent alternating in the house with the children, the other parent living in a camper in the backyard during their off week. On September 28th, 2 days later, following a conference call with a Utah judge, Judge Honeycutt set an emergency hearing and verbally ordered DHR to remove the children from the home. He had seen enough. The system was finally moving to protect Mia and Jacob. It was too late. The night of September 27th, before the emergency hearing, before DHR could act, Nancy made her preparations. She left her neighbors a purple suitcase containing a small amount of cash, some clothing, her cell phone, and a handwritten note. The note said, "If anything happens to me, my husband is responsible." She was setting a false trail, staging her own victimhood before committing an act she had already decided to carry out. Late that night or early on September 28th, Nancy Johnson drowned her 2 children in the bathtub. Jacob, 2 years old, went first or at the same time. Mia, 5 years old, fought back. Nancy held her 5-year-old daughter under the water in the bathtub, and Mia fought her. So Nancy picked up a knife and cut Mia's throat. Then she held her back under the water. The official cause of death for both children, drowning. For Mia, a contributing factor was blood loss from the throat laceration. After the children were dead, Nancy cleaned them. She dressed them. She carried them to the couch near the back door and arranged them under a blanket so they appeared to be sleeping. Then she walked to a hallway closet, looped a silk-type belt over the closet rod, and hanged herself. Derek had been staying in the backyard camper. He noticed the house had been dark and silent for nearly 24 hours. He heard nothing. He went to the front door, locked. He drilled out the deadbolt himself and pushed the door open. Inside, it was dark. He saw Mia and Jacob on the couch, apparently napping under a blanket. He walked over to Jacob and put his hand on the child's back to wake him, and understood immediately that something was catastrophically wrong. He then found Mia. Then he found Nancy in the closet. He called police in a state of shock, still processing what he was seeing. When investigators arrived, Derek was ruled out immediately as a suspect. His timeline was corroborated through multiple sources, receipts, and witness accounts. Sheriff Birch addressed the speculation directly. There were a lot of social media comments about him being responsible and that he probably did it. Well, he didn't. Birch also said something that deserves to stand alone in this documentary. I think that based on what I'm hearing, it's highly likely somebody within the system dropped the ball. 14 days. A written DHR warning. 2 children dead 16 months later. Derek told Fox News, "She didn't want me to have the kids. The kids were hers, and if she had to share them, she was going to take them with her." Nobody was charged. Nancy was dead. No trial. No verdict. No accountability through the courts. Just 2 small graves and a father who drilled out his own front door on a September morning and found his world destroyed. Mia Johnson was 5 years old. Jacob Johnson was 2. Case 10, Adrian Reed. Genesis in a dumpster, Enterprise, Alabama. On the night of December 25, 2025, surveillance cameras at an apartment complex in Enterprise, Alabama, captured a woman walking toward the dumpster. She was pulling a rolling duffel bag. She reached the dumpster. She deposited the bag. She walked back inside. The Christmas decorations were still up. The holiday music was still playing. The landfill collection truck would come the next day and take everything away. Inside that duffel bag, investigators now believe, was Genesis Nova Reed. 2 years old. 25 pounds. Black hair. Brown eyes. Last seen alive by her family on December 25th. For 53 days, nobody reported her missing. Adrian Reed was 33 years old at the time of her arrest in February 2026. She lived in the Meadowbrook Apartments on Apache Drive in Enterprise, Coffee County, Alabama. Neighbors who lived near her said they frequently saw Genesis outdoors, going on walks with her mother. They stopped seeing the child sometime around early January 2026. Nobody said anything. Nobody called anyone. Adrian Reed had a prior arrest involving a stabbing attack on her own mother, leaving a 5-inch laceration among other injuries that resulted in a reduced misdemeanor guilty plea. Genesis's father and other family members were cooperative with investigators from the start. They were not suspects. The suspicion fell immediately and entirely on Adrian Reed. December 25, 2025. Reed and Genesis visited Reed's family in Dothan for Christmas Day and returned to Enterprise late that evening. Surveillance footage from a neighboring residence captured Reed walking toward the dumpster at approximately 11:30 p.m., pulling the rolling duffel bag behind her. The footage, frame by frame, shows the bag going in, the woman walking back, the dumpster sitting still in the dark. The next day, December 26th, the dumpster was collected by a waste management truck. The contents were compacted inside the vehicle. The truck drove to a distribution facility where the load was compacted again. From there, the material was transported to the Coffee County landfill, where it was further processed by bulldozers and heavy compacting machines. If Genesis was in that bag, she had been through 3 rounds of industrial compression before anyone knew to look. 2 days after Christmas, surveillance footage captured Reed returning to the same dumpster carrying toys and other personal belongings that had belonged to Genesis. She was removing all evidence that the child had existed. For 53 days, Genesis was not reported missing. 53 days during which Adrian Reed continued to live her life in that apartment. Continued to go about her routine. Continued, according to prosecutors, to actively lie, manipulate, and destroy evidence. At approximately 3 a.m. on February 16, 2026, Adrian Reed called police. She told them she had woken up, noticed Genesis's bedroom was empty, found the front door of the apartment open, and believed the 2-year-old had simply walked out into the night on her own. Investigators immediately identified significant inconsistencies in her account. She was arrested the following day on charges of false reporting to law enforcement, a holding charge while the investigation expanded. What followed was one of the largest missing child investigations in Coffee County history. 75-plus law enforcement officers from the FBI, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, and local agencies across the region. By March 9, 2026, what would have been Genesis's 3rd birthday, investigators had executed 37 search warrants, logged more than 8,000 combined working hours, analyzed more than 5 terabytes of digital and physical evidence, and pursued 97 investigative leads across multiple states: Illinois, Texas, Tennessee, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Enterprise Police Chief Michael Moore described the toll on his department. All of us, just about 90-something% of us, have kids. It's tough. Lack of sleep, emotional trauma. Team Atom, a specialized unit from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children that focuses specifically on landfill searches, joined the effort. Senior Program Manager Richard Leonard described the challenge directly. Looking for a needle in a haystack. Coffee County Sheriff Scott Bird said investigators had narrowed the search area to approximately 200 feet by 100 feet, 8 to 10 feet deep. The search could take 10 weeks or longer. As of the recording of this documentary in mid-March 2026, Genesis's remains have not been recovered. On Genesis's third birthday, March 9, 2026, Chief Moore made the announcement. Through the careful and methodical work of investigators, we have reached the heartbreaking and horrific conclusion that her mother, her caretaker, the one that should have been there to keep her safe, willfully murdered Genesis and placed her in a duffel bag and discarded her in a dumpster. District Attorney James Tarbox announced the state would seek the death penalty. He described the 53 days between Christmas night and the police call as a 53-day-long campaign of deceit, lies, manipulation, and destruction of evidence. He said, "Her conduct speaks for itself, and I believe this preliminary decision to seek the death penalty conforms to our community's beliefs about this case and our shared values about how we value and seek to protect the most innocent among us, our children." Enterprise's community response was immediate and overwhelming. Pink lights went up across the region in solidarity. A candlelight vigil was held at Bates Memorial Stadium. Digital billboards displayed Genesis's face across the county. Hundreds of volunteers mobilized for the search. Enterprise Mayor William E. Cooper said, "The eyes of the nation are on Enterprise, and our hearts are with little Genesis." Adrienne Reed is currently held without bond at the Coffee County Jail, awaiting trial. The capital murder charge means that if convicted, she could face the death penalty. The case is in its earliest stages. The search for Genesis continues. She was 2 years old. She had black hair and brown eyes. She weighed 25 pounds. Her mother put her in a bag and rolled her to the trash on Christmas night. 10 cases, 10 mothers, 10 children, and more, who deserved protection that never came. From Rhonda Bell Martin dissolving ant poison into her daughter's milk in 1937, to Adrienne Reed rolling a duffel bag to a dumpster on Christmas night 2025. Nearly 90 years of the same betrayal. The same failure. The same horror dressed in different clothes. 5 women are currently on death row at Julia Tutwiler Prison for women. 1 was executed. 1 took her own life after taking her children's. 1 is sitting in a county jail right now, charged with capital murder, as investigators dig through a landfill looking for a little girl with brown eyes and black hair. These victims deserved better. Mason Scott deserved better. Phoenix Parish deserved better. Shanika, Latricia, and Christopher Ward deserved better. Dominiqua Bryant deserved better. Camari Holland deserved better. Mia and Jacob Johnson deserved better. Carson Matthews deserved better. Natalie and Chase DeBlaise deserved better. And Genesis Reed, wherever she is, deserved better than all of this. If this documentary moved you, there is one thing you can do right now. Hit that like button. Share this video. Leave a comment below with the name of the victim who stayed with you today, because these children deserve to be remembered by name. And if you have not yet subscribed to Silent True Crime Stories, do it now. We are here every week, telling the stories that need to be told, honoring the victims who cannot speak for themselves. We will see you in the next one. This is Silent True Crime Stories.